first, before you guys get going, really thank both of you for coming today to present what you've been working on. For me, this is a really exciting talk, and it's a great note to end the year on. I think I'm maybe more excited for this talk than any of the other ones we had so far, just because it's really cool to see the work that both Matt and Pat have done on Chivalry. For those of you who don't know Pat used to be a lecturer here at MDS, and was it 2016, 2017, before going to A44. And as you all know Matt, he's also been working at Torn Banner this year alongside his teaching role. So it's such a rewarding thing to be able to celebrate bringing industry in, not just to show you guys what it's like out there, but actually being able to host people who have a really meaningful connection to the school and a lot of history with us. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really thankful to have both of you here today.
Oh, awesome, thank you, Jordan. Cool. I guess I'll get us started then. Awesome. So here's us, Matt and Pat, and we're talking today about environment art in general, but more so than that, environment art as well in relation to Chivalry2. And yeah, there's me with hair. Some of you will remember. Cool. So before we get started, I'm just going to show you guys the trailer of the most recent map that's been released that we worked on.
Outer fortifications! Hold those heretics off at the walls! Reach the gate! Protect Lord Phaetron's tomb! Arena! Fire! 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hail the Masons! Kill them all!
Desecrate the city! End House Gallencourt!
Are we winning?
Cool. You probably hear it okay, but yeah, if you want to have a look, you can have a look at the link as well. Cool, so quick introductions. You guys know me, so I'll be quick. But fun fact, I didn't know, I actually started out with Chivalry making fan content. So Chivalry 1 had a workshop, and I ended up making props and weapons for the game, and got them in. And I was doing that during my time studying at MDS. So yeah, big passion for this kind of game, and it's definitely like a dream come true. Obviously, working on the sequel to one of my favorite games of all time, which is now also my favorite game, probably currently as well. As far as environment art has been concerned, I've always been dabbling in environment art. A lot of my student projects I was environment art on, but most recent kind of environment achievements other than Gallencourt and some of the maps, future maps that will be released for Chivalry, is I also made some content for Total Accurate Battlegrounds, which is in the game, like a monument, and I think 13 or something levels in Siege I've designed and done art for. So quite a lot of yeah, quite a lot of bits and pieces here and there, but Chivalry is my first kind of big environment art title, so I'm super excited for that. And yeah, now I'll hand over to Pat. Introduce yourself, Pat.
Hey there. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so I'm Pat. I am a 3D environment artist. I've been working in the game industry as a 3D environment artist for over 10 years now. I've shipped around a dozen titles during that time in like a wide range of genres and platforms. I've been a 3D artist for about 15 years, so I wasn't always in games. And my career was not, graduate from uni and then immediately get a job in games. I think hopefully for many of you, most of you, that's what will happen. But I kind of just wanted to walk you through my story and tell you a bit about how I got into games to hopefully provide you a bit of insight as to like a potential career path and what you might be doing throughout your career. So I studied fine arts at university, painting, drawing, sculpture, graduated, wanted to be some type of artist, actually initially like a comic illustrator, and then making scale models for film and television, but I found it quite difficult to find work doing that. So I started to get into 3D and I taught myself 3D, I guess over like 3 years while working some like small freelance jobs. And then I got into architectural visualization, so modeling, texturing and rendering for architectural projects, interiors, exteriors, and I did that for 3 years full time. But it wasn't really for me. It was great because I got a lot faster with modeling and texturing, and I learned like a ton of cool new techniques. But I realized that my skills kind of transferred over into gaming, and I've been a passionate gamer my whole life. So I started working on a portfolio, put something together, and then eventually got my first game job, which was at Gameloft in Montreal. I was working on their first-person shooter mobile franchise, Modern Combat. So I worked on like about 4 games from that franchise as the lead environment artist, making environments for mobile, and we also had a PlayStation 3 spin-off that I worked on as well. Then I had an opportunity to move to New Zealand to transfer to the Gameloft Auckland office, where on my first day I found out I was working on a My Little Pony game, which initially I thought, I wasn't really imagining this is what I'd be working on, but it was awesome. It was such a change of pace from what I've been doing like my whole life as an artist. And yeah, myself and one other artist basically built Ponyville for the mobile game, which super fun working in a different style, and I learned a whole bunch of new techniques from that. So yeah, that was awesome. Moving on from that, I got promoted to art lead of the next game, which is like a franchise game, Ice Age Adventures. Yeah, so actually I met Sam Yang working at Gameloft Auckland. We worked on this game, Ice Age Adventures, together. And he actually later went on to take over this project. So I sort of transitioned into like a leadership role, and I was not really doing as much environment art. It was more art direction, supervising all departments, characters, animation, concept art. And it was fun to have that much creative control, but at the end I was sort of feeling like I wanted to get back into art. So, thinking about your career path, you may get opportunities to be promoted into like leadership positions, which are great a lot of the time, but just kind of knowing if that's really what you want to do. And for me, by the end of it, it kind of wasn't. So I wanted to take a step back. And fortunately for me, the studio shut down. So I was pretty happy about that, but the other 139 people weren't. But yeah, so I jumped on to, so I joined MDS as a lecturer, which is where I met Matt and Jordan and Yvonne, David and Andrew, all the awesome people that work there. So there's a photo of me with some of the students at Armageddon. I didn't have to pixelate them out because I believe this image is like on the MDS website somewhere, but yeah, I thought it'd be kind of funny. Yeah, I met Matt there, and he was a super nice guy, super passionate, an awesome artist. And I found out that his favorite game, or one of his favorite games, was Chivalry, and that's something I remembered that. Well, I'll fill you in on the rest of that a little bit later, but you probably know what happened. After about 2 years at MDS, I got an opportunity to join A44 and work on the game Ashen, which was nearing release, so it was in like the final year of development. I came on as a senior artist, and I worked on the final dungeon, doing texturing, doing set dressing, doing lighting, and working on a bunch of the vistas throughout the game. So once that wrapped up, we moved on to Ashen DLC, downloadable content, which I took over as lead environment artist for that project. And that was an amazing experience because I got to work with a level designer and a concept artist. Between the three of us, we were given a ton of control to create this like volcanic island and define all the different spaces for it. And you know, the creative director was even like, hey, like, Pat, you're into D&D, right? Why don't you write the story for it as well? So I did a first pass on the story. They had to change a bunch of stuff, but there's a few of my ideas that got in there, which is a great thing about working for an indie studio is I found that you have a lot more kind of freedom to like put your ideas forward and have them actually accepted. Whereas if you're working for like a bigger machine or a company like Ubisoft, where they have like 3,000 employees globally, it's a bit harder to get your ideas in. So this was actually a really great experience for me. And then following that, I went on to become the lead artist of their next project, which they're currently still working on. But I kind of fell back into that role of being a lead, which I said I was never going to do again, and then I ended up doing. So I ended up taking a step back, taking 3 months off, working on my portfolio, moving back to Canada, and I got a job working at Torn Banner on Chivalry2. I'm just going to kind of quickly go through some of the levels I worked on and some of the tasks that I did because they're quite varied. Chivalry2 is also a smaller indie team, about the size of A44. And so you get to kind of work on a lot of different things. So my first level was pretty much done. All the buildings and stuff were done, but they needed someone to do the set dressing. So I put all the rocks in the level, barrels, piles of wood, even down to like clumps of grass and little bits of like flavor to sort of define the key angles of the scene. I didn't place the pumpkins. This is from our Halloween update, but unfortunately I have not yet taken my screenshots from this level, so this is the best one I could find. Moving on from that, moved on to a new level, Escape from Fallmire, starting from scratch. So I actually got assigned like a whole section of the level, which in this case was the castle, so the keep, the inner courtyard, and just working with level design to like make it play well, make it look good. And we had the entire team working on it, each artist working on a different section, which actually worked really well with our map structure because we have objectives where you move from location to location. They're kind of themed a little bit differently. Moving on from that, I worked on a level called Fighting Pit, where I was actually given like artistic control over the level. So I defined the visuals, did all the reference gathering, put together some blockouts, did most of the texturing, and then I was working with another artist who's named Paul, who's amazing, and he basically just made everything look great. So like most of what you see in this image is like his finished product, but we kind of both worked together to bring it to fruition. And then finally, the biggest map, most ambitious map we've worked on to date, the one that Matt joined while we were working on. And again, like most of what you see here is what Matt did. I just like literally just put it in the level. But yeah, so I did like castle walls and stuff. Paul did like that awesome cathedral and the boats, and Matt did like pretty much everything else. Yeah, so and that's kind of where we are now, working together on Chivalry 2. And I think, yeah, at this point I'll kind of pass it over to Matt, and he can kind of go over some environment stuff and his experience working on Chivalry 2 and some of the like tips and techniques that we used during production.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. So yeah, I came on during Gallencourt, which was really cool, and we'll get back to Chivalry in a minute. But first, I got like a couple of slides and just in general, I think, environment art questions that people might have. So, number one, getting started in environment art. I think this is a question a lot of people have, like how do you become an environment artist? I think the most important thing for me, I'm not sure if you agree with Pat, is just get started making stuff. Obviously, your school assignments help a lot, but I find for me a big personal drive, as you kind of saw from the stuff I've shared with you guys on the first slide and in the past, is a lot of fan projects and modding is what got me into environment art. Started out making mods for Skyrim, just using the assets they already had in the engine and placing them around. Just getting involved with game engines, competitions and challenges, Sketchfab or Polygon. Entering into things that motivate you to make environments. Can't really put it any simpler than that, I suppose. Another question you guys might have is Chivalry2 software. So what do we use to make Chivalry? Chivalry's made in UE4. If you want to have like a really cool in-depth look, there's a really cool Unreal Engine stream with James, who's their lead environment artist, and Aurelian, who's a level designer. A 2-hour like live stream of Engine. We're gonna have a look at Gallencourt at the end here. We're gonna jump into the map and have a fly around and answer any questions you guys might have, or just have a look at some stuff, discuss it. But this is another like a longer look at that too. We use lots of different software. Primarily what I'm using for modeling mostly is Maya, a little bit of ZBrush for when we need sculpting, Substance Painter, Quixel Mixer, Quixel Mega Scans, like redoing, repologizing scans and stuff, and reusing that to make trims and that kind of jazz. Houdini, all the cool explosions and effects are all done by James, our lead, and he's got he did the boat exploding that you saw, and the what do you call it, the big dome, the gazebo falling down, stuff like that. Recently we started using Gaia as well for our distance terrain, and obviously a little bit of Photoshop I tend to use as well to clean some different textures up and different bits and pieces here and there, and also get my screenshots and everything ready for the weekly meetings. Cool, so for UE4 environment art essentials, these are things I thought I would include because they're things that I kind of knew about, but didn't really realize quite how important they were, I suppose, until I started working on Chivalry. And I think for some games, maybe they're not as big of a deal, but for like a live service, multiplayer only combat game, a lot of these things for an environment artist is very important. I think for any game where traversal is important or performance is important, these are all really important tips and tricks. Only one of these is really, I suppose, like on the surface, a very art-based trick, but I think they're all like they're all art in my opinion. So number one is draw calls. I didn't realize that these were quite as important as they were. Gallencourt, I think, has too many. If I'm right saying that, Pat, too many draw calls. It's a little bit higher than some of our other maps. But essentially having one material per object in Unreal Engine, so it draws less often. So in Gallencourt, a lot of optimization, especially I did a little bit. Paul did quite a bit too, and Pat was making these with trims too. It kind of falls into our next idea, but making sure that, for example, the barrel or the door or the table doesn't have a metal texture or a wood texture, a wood ends texture, and that your house and your bricks are all on one texture sheet, so it's only one draw call, and that kind of stuff helps immensely with performance, more so than polygons. At MDS, I think we put a big emphasis on polygons. Polygon count's very important, but I think the draw call is actually often left on the wayside a little bit in our discussions around it. So keeping everything one material, super important to remember. This isn't a Chivalry map. This is what we've been making in Well Design. You guys in Well Design will recognize it this time around. But kit sets and trim sheets, these are invaluable because they allow you to go with less draw calls per object, in my opinion. So having a set of pieces here that you can use to build the trims for the assets, and then having your blend material, which is like a bit of an extra different material blending, which is more draw calls, but that's separate from the trims. So just a base mesh that you can paint on. Trims go over the top. Vert color doesn't affect those. So it works by painting on vert color to dictate, which surface is which. So yeah, pretty cool. And yeah, Quixel is awesome. So if you're not sure about this stuff, what I've found recently is that Quixel has a lot of kit sets available already that you can try out. Not this one I made, but there's like a few there that you can just download and have a go with. It also has really easy blend materials that you can like plug and play with Bridge into Unreal. So if you wanted to have a try with some of these techniques, I'd recommend having a look at some of those mixer Quixel assets and just have a play around inside of Unreal. It's like a really good way to start as well if you haven't considered or done much environment art before. It's just using pre-existing stuff and trying to create a fully fledged complete scene out of it. This one's, I suppose, a little bit obvious, but I used to make a lot of my collisions in Engine, which I think is a bit of a bad idea. But I realized how useful, especially for the stuff we're doing, where collision is quite important, and also you want to keep it quite efficient, to use a thing called UCX collision, which essentially is you just group your collision, you name it correctly, matching the object within your object, and you keep it all convex, which is why there's multiple, so that it runs efficiently too. And this is better than what Unreal can generally generate for you, right? Yeah, I didn't really realize quite how important collision was until working with Chivalry and what clean collision is good for. So hand making it in Maya, I think, is better than making it by hand. LODs as well, for performance. LODs tend to kind of, I think, especially in your student games, when you're in a rush and like maybe there's not a lot of performance. I know for our game there wasn't a massive amount of performance stuff for our environment art. There was performance for other stuff, but yeah, didn't realize, I guess, how essential LODs were, and also how important it is to actually customize the distances that automatic LODs will spit out for you as well. So checking those distances and making sure that they're not your LODs are actually popping at correct distances and not you haven't got the 7,000 triangle 70,000 triangle chicken that's rendering across the map behind a house, that kind of stuff. So just things to think about. Another one as well is dithering. I used to use transparency pretty much solely, but didn't really realize until I started working on the project that how expensive transparency actually is, especially when you turn on your shader complexity and have a look. But dither is my favorite new trick. You guys also know that I've been losing the plot about dither. I think it's looks for the most part just as good as transparency, I think, and it's a fraction, crazy amount of savings as far as how cheap it is to render compared to transparency. We use it a lot in Chivalry for our pixel depth dither, which essentially messes with how the depth offset of where the things have been drawn on the screen to produce this soft edge around the geometry, which is great for adding dirt piles. And until you're a fully fledged environment artist, you won't know what it feels like to be excited about how nicely this dirt sits against the wall. Because I know this, when I saw this for the first time in Chivalry, I lost the plot. It's my favorite thing I've ever seen. So I thought I'd share that one as well. A quick recap: draw calls, keep it one material, use your trims and kit sets to help you reduce, recycle, and lower these things. Make sure you always apply your LODs, and UCX is a great way to make good clean collision quickly inside of your 3D package of choice. Dither is greater than transparency. I love dither. Dither representative number one from Oades, I reckon. Cool. Some extra things I've learned quickly is sometimes you have crazy ideas. You can see this gate over here I made, which is the crazy colors that didn't get in the game. But I think it's fun to explore. We ended up landing, I think, on the gold instead of the grey metal on the holy gate of Gallancourt. based on that idea instead. Benchmarking your art. So this is a lot of my props that I put into a separate level to test the style. I think this is a lot of things people don't do enough. People often leave it in the Maya scene or something until you put it into the engine. So creating a benchmark scene, iterating on your ideas, creating lots of different variants, working with animation, so making sure that you're thinking about, especially when you're working with someone else's system, like a pre-existing door system, that you break that down. And on this door here, I didn't animate anything extra, but I modeled in like a Boolean crack in the door, so it looks like it breaks open. It doesn't need any extra effects, right? There was no extra overhead for any of the other members based on that decision. So thinking carefully about what you can do to help and working within systems that already exist. Implementing secrets is fun. That's like a sneak peek of a secret. And distance models. This is actually probably the most fun thing that I discovered in Chivalry that I hadn't really been doing too much in the past, just because I've never had the need for efficient distance stuff in anything I've been working on. But we'll have a look at them in a minute in our tour in Galencourt. But I made some, based on Pat's recommendations, some really low poly houses with essentially screenshots of the houses slapped onto the side of them, and they're amazing up close, but from afar look just as good as the houses would from a distance lotted, probably even better. So decorating like the stuff that you'd only get a glimpse of potentially in the game when you get launched by a ballista, or when you're in the free flying camera mode, you look over the horizon and see what you can check out over on the street over in the non-gameplay space. So those are probably my 4 main key learnings and some just extra stuff that I had a look at. I think now, if you guys are keen, we could jump into a Galencourt tour, have a look around the map, answer some questions. We'll do a question time at the end as well. And then we're going to move after that into some tips and tricks for your portfolio and stuff from Pat. Cool. All right, Pat. Cool. So this is Galencourt. Do you want to talk a little bit about the narrative of Galencourt and kind of what happened in its development before I came on, Pat?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you're those of you familiar with Chivalry lore. There are 2 factions. There's Agatha and Mason. Agatha's blue, Mason is red. They sort of have different principles, different kind of architectural styles. Mason is like a little bit cruder, I think, and Agatha is a little bit more refined. So here you see the Agathian holy city of Galencourt, which is mentioned in a previous map, Lionspire, where the Mason fleet is like on their way to Galencourt, but have to like take out this trebuchet and a castle on the way. And this is the point when they actually arrive and they're like assaulting this castle by land. So this is kind of the equivalent of like the Vatican City to Agatha. So it's the most pristine level that we've made in Chivalry so far. It's very clean. It was sort of loosely inspired by the White Tower of London, although we've taken like quite a few liberties. So you can't really tell by looking at it, but just a few of the architectural details were taken from there. So that's sort of the narrative. Mason are trying to break in and just destroy everything, destroy the ships, destroy a bunch of statues, and then eventually like destroy the tomb of a war hero.
Yeah. So the assault starts here. There's a section that Pat and Paul worked a lot on. Paul did a lot of this like winery exterior stuff, and Pat made all of this cool first kind of gate objective. At the start of the map, the Masons spawn outside of the city and have to storm the gates and capture these towers. During development, we can move around the spawners quite a lot, and a lot of this positioning and timings and like the balance essentially has changed quite a lot. So I think in Chivalry compared to maybe some other more single player games, I think the flow and like the setup of the level we have to be quite agile and fluid with how we make stuff, because quite a lot of areas changed quite a bit as we worked over it for that few months they've had.
Yeah. So like ideally, when we're not fixing like critical bugs, we're generally like playtesting the levels every week, at least once or twice a week. So now the whole studio jumps on for like an hour and a half. We run through a bunch of the maps, which is awesome. And then out of those play tests, we go back and iterate, and then the next week we play all the new changes and kind of see, how that plays. And then also, generally that's maybe 20 to 30 people, but we also routinely organize like big 64 player play tests, because that's like the real test of the map. These maps are designed for 64 players, so you need to make sure the spaces work for that player count, but also hold up on a lower player count.
Yeah, the playtest is definitely one of the funnest parts about it. I really like them. They're quite early in the morning, and I think the only negative thing about it is the ping, because we're in New Zealand and they're in Canada. So if we were playing in New Zealand, I reckon I could get a few more people, get a few more kills, but it's still really good fun. We've got some interesting high ping strategies to work with. So after the Masons capture these two flags, they push forward to the docks. So we'll come through here. This is like a hidden objective where you capture this courtyard, and it happens behind the scenes, not on the maps. It's like a little secret for you guys. You might have be aware of the map already. You have to capture this point before the spawners move up closer to the docks, and then we get to the dock point. On this objective, you have to capture 2 boats. This was all Paul's domain. I didn't touch anything really in the dock. Did you, Pat? I think it's all Paul.
Yeah, everything here is Paul.
Yeah, and James did the really badass mast explosion, which is the coolest thing when you're fighting on the boat and the mast explodes and starts coming down and everyone gets flung everywhere. So as the Masons, your objective is to get on board these boats. You have to capture one after the other. You can do it in either order, and light an explosive fuse to detonate those bombs. There's also a sad whale hanging out here, which was a late but welcome feature, I think, to the level. Cool. The next objective, this is where I come in, is the Holy Gate. So when I joined this, all of pretty much the entire level was blocked out. The cathedral area was a little bit different, but this area was kind of blocked out, and this is where I made my my start in Chivalry. This building here is the first building that I made. We'll get to that in a second. So this objective, I think, is actually even more fun than the boat capture. You have to pick up these explosive barrels now instead of just lighting them, and carry them all the way up to the gate. You lay them in front of the gate, and once there are 3 of them there, they'll explode. So it's real fun making. All the doors in the level are pretty much mine. I think all the doors are mine, maybe, except for maybe 1 or 2. But really fun seeing James explode them in Houdini as well. Really satisfying. Sorry. Cool. After you blow up the gate, you have to do it again, but this time to a portcullis. And essentially, the way we did it is Pat blocked out all of the architecture in here. So there were blockouts of all of the towers, all of the placements for the main gameplay areas. And then he let me loose to go over and pretty much add trim sheets and redo the assets. So I'll show you this little guy here. I'm pretty proud of this little pile of rocks. My first little building, and this is like a modular kit. So you can see there we have our separate mesh for painting our different damage states onto. And then our separate trims, which saves on draws, having them separate. Also, it makes it when you're lodding them down, that it doesn't consider this trim part of the lods. This one will load nicer. It doesn't really need to lod because it's so low anyway, but it will load nicer because they're separate too. I think it's quite a cool workflow for putting stuff together. Anything else you want to kind of add here, Pat?
Not really. I guess just on your point of like blocking stuff out, I think that's like a super crucial part of making a level. So there's gray boxing where level designers just kind of place cubes, but we kind of do more refined blockouts where I'll actually like take a tower or take that building and I'll actually kind of model it really crudely and slap on some like tileable textures. I'll kind of model the whole thing. Like someone said in chat, what happened to modeling it in Maya? That's what I would do. We put in the scene, so we know how it's going to fit in the scene. But modeling the whole thing, you're going to have a super high poly asset that's drawing all the time. So if you can see one brick in that building, that whole building's going to be loaded. But the way that Matt's broken it down into these modules and snapped them together, you only load in what you're going to see. So as you come around a corner and you see one brick, it's going to load in that brick trim and the building trim. And all other, whatever, 6 rows of that building are not going to be drawn. So that's actually done for performance reasons and also for light mapping, because the more geo you have, the higher resolution a light map you need and the worse it's going to look. So yeah, that's basically what I'd say kind of on blocking out and modules.
Yeah, it's like another big learning for me actually is that trying to find that balance. There's not really like a set line, right, in the sand where it's like this is good or this is a bad level of modularity to have. But the more modules you have, the more draws, and the less modules you have, the more triangle, bigger light maps, bigger lods and stuff. So like, yeah, it's definitely like I think a balancing. I think if I did this again, I would make these modules a little bit bigger than they are. I think having them such thin slices was a little bit. I probably didn't need to have them quite as modular, but again, always learning, right? Lessons learned every time. Cool. Yeah, lighting is big, which takes a little while and sets the CPU on fire. Actually, I lied. The first thing I made was this bell. I keep forgetting. I thought it was this wall, but I made this. Pat got me making this little bell tower first. Just on that. But pretty consecutive. The bell tower and then that little each building there. Yeah, I'll quickly show you guys these sides too, because as the new kid on the block, I was given the spawn areas to set dress and decorate. So my kind of claim to fame, I suppose, are these medieval houses, which I made based on the blockout, but the blockout was very bare compared to these ones. So these are like my first original kind of asset.
Yeah, the blockout was very bad. You made it look good.
It gave a pretty good idea, I think. But yeah, it's my first original one that wasn't just a like remastering all of Pat's cool stuff. I'm so pretty proud of that. And these areas, which I set dressed, I probably over set dressed them because they're not gameplay areas, but you spawn on these side areas and run through. But I really like them because I made them. They're my little areas. So pretty happy about that. This one too, probably is one of my favorite vistas that I made with like the overflowed drain. And a little secret for you to play the game, there's a pick-upable fish in here that you can pick up and slap people with if you come down here. Out of bounds, run out of bounds for a few seconds before you get the kill. Is it Frank? No, but one of Frank's many cousins, I suppose. Interesting. Yeah, so these two spawn areas on the side feed the Agathons into here while the Masons are assaulting through the gate. For Masons, there's a couple of options. You can come through the gate, which is probably the brute force option, or you can climb the ladders and try and mess with everybody on the wall. One thing which is a little bit interesting about this architecture I found, I think you agree with me, Pat, is that there's this gate you're trying to blow up. There's also this sort of big openings on the side. So contextually, it's not the makes the most sense, but I think aesthetically and like from a gameplay point of view, it yeah, not having like a blocked off area for the defenders to
Yeah.
stream in was necessary for that.
Yeah, so this was an issue that was raised early, but we didn't really have a solution for it. So sometimes, like we try to keep things as like realistic as possible, but a lot of the times you need to make considerations for gameplay that kind of don't make sense, and the best we can do is just like make them look cool.
Yeah, making compromises with like the level designers and art to like find like a middle ground solution for that works for gameplay and art is often yeah, I like a good use of time and best practices as well. I think because there's no point if it looks pretty and the game sucks, right? So you got to have a bit of both. Cool. Now we're at this part. Let's talk about this objective, I suppose, a little. This is the second to last objective. It's a pretty big one. Zoom all the way back out. But essentially, once the Masons break through the portcullis, they have to sack the town, essentially destroy the sacred relics is the objective name. So that involves collapsing the gazebo, like we saw in the video, as well as smashing all of the statues around the side. And I think, Pat, you spent probably, I think, the majority of your time in here, if I'm correct. There was a lot of cool pavement work and
Yeah, so this was one area that had so many iterations between level design and art to make it look good or look okay and play well. Because often we'll get a block out from level design that looks so abstract that you can't even see it as like a location that would ever exist in the real world. And for me, it's exciting to be able to take those blockouts and turn them into something that looks real and looks like it belongs, but also this level design does need to be a bit abstract sometimes. So kind of trying to find that compromise. But yeah, so unlike the buildings, which were modules, this ground and this pathing stuff was all custom modeled. So in this case, I did model this in Maya. So I'd basically export everything we had in the scene from Unreal, and then I would model in this custom mesh to line up perfectly. The downside is if somebody moves one thing, you have to go back into Maya and adjust that mesh to make it accommodate. The cool thing about that is you can put like a lot of custom stuff in, like their little like very minor like dips in the path that you wouldn't be able to do with like just a flat asset. So there's like a little like bow in the center of the road. That kind of gives it like that worn feeling, which is probably the coolest thing about using custom meshes. But it's just a pain and it's really time consuming to set up.
yeah, I think yeah, trims and like for me, like using the unitize inside of Maya and unfolding along one axis was like a game changer as far as laying out this kind of asset when you have like a wacky road you need to lay out in Maya. That was kind of like a big eureka moment for those tools for me, where I was like, these are really meaningful tools. And check it out, look. Here it is. The dirt. Blending in really nicely. I get excited about it. I love the dirt. We've also got some of these areas in the game. I really like these micro kind of environments within each stage. I think originally the plan was to have more of this area as a fairground APAT, but ended up with like a small fairground, a smaller fairground section. But honestly, usually I failed to defend the objective because I'm spending too much time hanging out on the stage here with a harp or a flute, or throwing a wine bottle at somebody's head, playing the ring toss while everyone's fighting over there trying to smash everything down.
Yeah, Andrew asked if we make much use of decals. Yeah, we use them a ton. Unfortunately, they're very expensive on console, on Xbox specifically, so we actually need to disable them. So if you're playing on Xbox, you won't see any of those little leaks.
Sponges.
And but Honestly, you don't really notice. It's only if you're kind of in the game really looking for those details that you'll see them. But yeah, we use a ton of them.
Yeah,
Like
there's some
little
like different
footsteps on the ground.
detail there.
Splines, yep. If like all those curbs that you see, because those would have been such a pain to model in Maya. So all the kind of bending, like the sides of the roads, and those blocks, those are all splines that we can adjust on the fly. In terms of specific measurement size for our kits, ideally, yes, we would, and in some levels we do. This one, it was very difficult to get all the elements to snap to a grid. So we try to set them up snapping to a grid with specific measurement size, like generally snapping to 1 meter. But in this case, just with all the crazy angles and all the unique assets, it was pretty much impossible. So ideally we would, but in this case we didn't. Matt did for his modules, but not for most
Yeah,
of us.
but even a lot of the modules ended up being clipped together in the end anyway, like not perfectly snapping, just because certain placement dictated a different a different layout. So yeah, like working to like a module size for some, but as far as getting the scale correct, James, essentially I have the little Mason Knight from the game exported. So that everything I'm making, I'm always putting the knight next to it, looking at the scale and going, is the windows slightly too small? Is it the right size for a person? And measuring it all sort of that way. Our vegetation is made by Tyler Burnett, who's he's been like a long time Chivalry artist working on Chivalry 1, and he did all of I think all of the foliage. Correct if I'm wrong, Pat. But
Yeah, he's like our foliage person. So he does pretty much everything.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess before we get to the last objective, I want to show you those distance houses I was talking about. So you can see over here we get the normal houses within the view, and then the further away you get, you start to see these. And those are the kind of quality of mesh that you get all the way out here on the old on the edges. And those were just screenshotted straight out of the engine and placed in, and were quite fun. And our distance trees as well. I think those are made similarly, right, Pat? It's a screenshot of the trees in game.
Yeah, I think I made those ones.
But I think they work really well from over there. How did we handle the foliage on the buildings? Pat, actually, you put these together, right? These vine pieces.
Yeah. So yeah, for foliage, we used speed tree for a lot of it. Some of it has to be custom, like these ones I just put together in Maya. If we have like ivy climbing up a building, that's I'm not sure how Tyler makes them, but it's just a texture mapped to a plane, and we add a bit of volume to it, and then we just place those manually. And in terms of texturing, we haven't used much Substance Designer yet. We get into it if we need to do something specific, but we generally use Megascans or an occasional like high poly bake.
I know that everyone uses different stuff too. I'm primarily using all Quixel stuff, but I know Paul, who did the boats in the cathedral, was using a lot of Substance tools. I'm not sure about Designer, but definitely Painter. I assume Bakes and Painter. That's my assumption. This area is really cool too. This is like one of my other favorite areas that Pat put together. It's like absolutely lovely with all the pathing details and also the little Easter egg names of the houses. So I put this one for me. We got Frank the Fishmonger, which is my screen name, Frank the Fish, selling some fish, and Fix Apothecary too.
So kind of to answer Jack's question as well, how do we plan out the different areas to make them make sense? Well, Yeah, designers are pretty heavy-handed at the beginning in determining what each area is in general, like docks, gazebo, cathedral. But then after that, if there are spaces that aren't defined, we can kind of come in. Like that whole area that Matt just showed, we just decided that it would be cool because Matt's buildings looked awesome to turn it into like a kind of a shop corner, like a bit of a Diagon alley type of thing. And we turned it into an Easter egg as well. So all the environment artists have shops named after them. We actually have like a pretty cool feature where if you stand next to the door, we've all recorded like voiceover lines that play like randomly. So that's just kind of one of like the sort of fun things that we get to do. But yeah, so basically designers give us the kind of general feeling, but an area like this, we had total control. So I think I dressed in this area and decided to kind of make it like a bit of a public circle square thing with benches, and it's awesome because like players just come and sit down on the bench, so you have like members of all teams just sitting here like just chilling, reading books while everyone's fighting. Yeah, so it's a bit of both, and there's always a bit of compromise. Aside from the big objectives, level designers generally just say this just needs to be a cube, you can turn it into whatever you want.
Yeah, that's definitely like the micro elements are definitely like entirely open. It's like just the major objective points where like that often they won't even comment on like the visuals of it. They'll say we want players to be doing this in this area, and thus we need a staircase or whatever, right? And then it's up to us to like justify that somehow in within the architectural design, which I think is a really fun challenge, and I imagine it's how a lot of studios work, hopefully, where it's like yeah, it provides both the gameplay side and the aesthetic side chance to work together, and also I think it generates good challenges too. Someone's like, we're gonna put a stairway here, and it's like, whoa, okay, that's a wild place for a stairwell. What can we do? And then you come up with like a really clever piece of level design or art that like actually looks really cool and you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, right? So I think it's as well as being like a necessary thing, it's also I think quite a good idea generator as well. Sweet. Cool. The next kind of objective is to moving on from smashing all the statues down is smashing into the cathedral, so breaking in. So you have to break down the front door. Once the front door is broken down, you can also break the side doors, and the objective change. So this objective mostly is played in this area, which is all pat. Everything you see here. The cathedral itself, except for the doors, I made the doors, is all Paul. Matt makes doors. Me. Got the cool door. And then the final objective is to break open Phaedrad's tomb. Phaedrad is actually, fun fact, he's a playable king, so a hero character. And Chivalry has quite a lot of objectives where if you have the highest score in that round, on the last objective, as the defender with the highest score, you get to play as like a hero character that has more health. And the objective is to protect you, right? And you have to hold out until the game ends, and if you do, you win. So Phaedrad's actually, from the first game, he's one of the kings. So obviously in the first game, narratively, he dies. But yeah, it's kind of a cool little connection back to it, I think, as well. Contextualizes the gameplay as a proper siege. Yeah, I think I like to think of this one as it's a big Mason prank. They're breaking into like smash a tomb. It's really fun. But this objective is a lot of fun too. We have a lot of these assets in the game too that are drop traps, so you can see the effect of it hitting the ground. Yeah, so if you throw something or shoot it, it'll fall down on people and kill everybody nearby. I think a big part of Chivalry is those interactions, like the fact that you can pick up these lanterns and fight with them. You know, you can sit on all the benches. You can come into the confession booth, sit down in there, and yell out voice lines at people. There's the final objective. which is just hack it with your swords until he James did a cool simulation where the Phaedron's body falls out of the tomb onto the floor and the game ends.
In terms of that question about, is there a point where kit sets become inefficient, like if pieces are broken down too small? Yes. Like, you definitely don't want every single brick to be separate. Possibly like an entire window with those bricks might be a separate kit piece. But generally, there isn't really a set rule. It's just sort of kind of finding that balance. Like, each of those pillars in the back might be their own separate piece. Not sure how Paul did it, but
Be a big chunk, I think, actually, or some
Yeah.
group. But with the bees, for example, so it's a big one. It's a group 2. Find a blueprint. Like a little one. Open the blueprint. Hang on, so you can find it. Lost my editing.
So yeah, for destruction, yes, we do use vertex animation textures, which is basically you make an animation in Houdini, and it exports this crazy looking texture that I'm actually not an expert on this, but kind of treats that as like an animation timeline that controls all the vertices of the mesh. And the texture is quite big, but it's much cheaper than like rigging every single piece and then animating it. And you can change the simulation kind of on the fly in Houdini to give it more like impulse, directionality, and then just re-export that texture, and it'll update in the game. So yeah, it looks awesome. So that's what we use for pretty much all destruction.
Cool. The light beams are, I think, they're custom as well. Paul faked the light beams in the cathedral.
Yeah, we
Not
generally
light up with the sun.
we generally fake all that stuff because it's really difficult to get an exterior lighting situation that will just work perfectly interior,
Yeah.
especially if it's like shining through a stained glass window.
Yeah. So, back to James' question about the breaking down of the trims. I suppose it can be for these assets. We actually split the windows into separate pieces so that they could cull sooner than the rest of it. So there's actually like a little hole behind there, so that at distance it won't look so bad if it just pops out, because the windows ended up being quite a lot of them, right? Quite expensive. So I think it also depends, that question, on how many of like the things you have and how many you want to split up and how expensive they are too. So it's like a very complex kind of idea that you kind of have to, I suppose, battle depending case by case what you're working on.
Yeah, for this one, I feel like we should have combined like probably all 12 of those windows,
Into one, yeah. So it was one draw.
or like 6 and 6.
Yeah, even if it was rows, if it kept the thin modules, but I wanted to make the modules bigger as well. And also the decals are in here too, which are those smudges that we were talking about before. And our vertex paint on these are all saved, so when we drag this blueprint in, all that damage we've painted on stays as well, which is pretty cool. There was another question I saw before we didn't answer about the banners, right? I think that was, who was that? Sorry, Karen.
Yeah, so that's sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I don't know exactly behind the scenes. Maybe you can talk about how it works behind the scenes, but I know it uses a UV channel. So it uses the U axis and on a second UV set, and it's laid out along that UV. And essentially, the further along the U it is, I think, the more the sine wave affects it. So any cloth can be anchored by putting the UV on the far, the zero space of the UV, and then the more you want to flap, the more you can put it over. And those variables parameters are also exposed for us to play with per material instance as well, if you want to have a more flappy flag for a more windy level. But maybe you got more insight into the impact.
Yeah, well, it's just vertex animation. So whatever you plug into the world position offset node, I believe. Obviously, it's more complex than that, but you can do like a scrolling cloud texture multiplied over another scrolling cloud texture. But we have a lot of other variables where you can control the direction. So it's only like in this case blowing off of the wall. Or you could have it just blowing sideways. This is a very advanced material, which I have only ever copied and then modified,
Yeah.
and I did it wrong. But fortunately, it was not too performance of a performance hit because it's in a small level. But yeah, generally we save this for people who actually know what they're doing.
Yeah, I've also worked in it. I haven't been told off yet, so I think I've done okay. But I used it the same instance for like draping cloth over things and then having them flop around at the bottom, so you can UV essentially camera base your asset. Let's say a barrel with a cloth over it from the side, and you want the bottom to like flop around in the wind. So you can soft select and drag that out and scale the parts that are like attached to the barrel, or like dropped on it over a bit more. So I think it's actually like for a UV based system, it's quite intuitive. I think it would be harder driving it with anything else, but it's like very customizable. Like you could definitely make the flag flop not using UV, I suppose. But I think the fact that it's reusable and there's other different contexts of other cloth makes it quite useful. But yeah.
In terms of poly count, there isn't really an average. Some of like our bigger assets, I would say, can get as high as like maybe 30,000 triangles for LOD 0, but that's for like a hero piece. And with LODs, that's gonna LOD down to like a few thousand quite quickly. I'd say like a general asset, like a prop barrel or something might be around 5,000 triangles. A building might be around between 10 and 15,000. With LODs, triangle count is not super important. It's kind of just like the combined triangle count of what you are seeing. So when we do our profiling, you can type in like stat space engine, and it'll show you all the tries that are visible in the scene. This doesn't always work accurately, but yeah, static mesh tries. So we got like just over 1 million, which is generally our target. We can go a bit higher, and we often do, but that's
These
kind of
big open views are really expensive, eh? Like where more stuff's visible.
yeah. So that's kind of more important than the individual like average triangle count. But yeah, generally between like 5 and 30,000, I would say.
Yeah, I think more so is keeping the like your use of topology consistent when you're modeling, like looking at what's already in the project and not like making something which is crazy more like polygon dense than it should be at that scale. And that consistency helps when everything's a LOD 0 and close to it, or when it's further away. But with that rule of thumb coming in, right, the bigger something is, the more triangles you can use if you're trying to keep your kind of density relatively consistent. But yeah, good question.
In terms of file hierarchy, we probably can't show you that because there might be some unreleased stuff in there. But in terms of assets, we generally have stuff sorted. We have like kind of a generic like props folder, and then that's broken down into specific categories of props. So in this case, this is an Agathian city, so these will all be taken from the Agatha props folder, which has its own subfolder for materials and textures. In terms of all this architecture, because it's kind of custom, we have a specific architecture folder, and then every level has its own subfolder. So this is the Galencourt architecture folder. And then vegetation has its own folder as well. And we try to break it down even more. So within like Galencourt architecture, you'll have like cathedral. I'm pretty bad with breaking it down super fine, so we just kind of have one folder for all the Galancourt stuff. But it definitely helpful to sort stuff into its respective folder.
Yeah, we're a bit naughty on this map, and just had like a Galancourt folder with everything in it. At least for our sections. But we're doing a bit better now. Improving, right, every day.
Yeah, we do use, well, we kind of use instant static meshes. I mean, the Unreal foliage tool is based around that, so all of our foliage is an instant static mesh. We, if we have a ton of the same object in the level, like 500 instances of like a rock mesh, we generally convert that into a hierarchical instant static mesh. We have a script to do that and then to go back. But with the new release of Unreal, it kind of does that automatically. So we don't really have to manually do that. But yeah, we did use them in instances where you have a big draw distance and a ton of the same object drawing. And basically what it does is it kind of batches them together. So if you have like 500 objects, it's like 500 draw calls. It becomes like
I think
only
these guys
like
had it
a
done.
few draw calls.
Oh, maybe not. There was something in the distance that we ran it on. I can't remember what it was though. In the fences or somewhere, I'm not sure. But yeah. Preferred faction? Oh, not really. In Chivalry 1 I used to like Masons, and I think it was because the I like the color red and like their stuff was a bit more edgy and cool looking. The Agathons are very like high medieval, and I kind of like Dark Age medieval stuff. So like their aesthetic matches better with that kind of idea. But honestly, I play them both equally now because it's really fun to have those multiple perspectives, and I think limiting yourself to a faction when you play a match is like, you know, you get stuck playing the same objective when you could be trying the other way, right? It's a whole different experience defending than it's attacking. So
Yeah, I prefer Agatha in general, but it really depends on the objective. Like this one, I much prefer attacking as Mason, because you know you can like fire yourself off out of a catapult like over the walls, and just that experience is just like so awesome. And like blowing up the ships and that feeling of progression is more rewarding than like just defending something.
yeah, it's definitely like I identify with the aesthetics of the Masons a bit more. I like that medieval period a little bit better, but both I like equally, I'd say.
No, you don't die getting fired from a catapult. You take damage, but it's often quite
Yeah,
quite
and these
worth it.
ones conveniently they'll land you right on the wall, which is really nice.
But there are also ballistas on the wall that can like fire you out of the air. There are a ton of like fan videos online of people getting like blasted out of the air.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can fire multiple people from a catapult at the same time.
Yeah, I think the catapult's a great way to get some of the slackers on objective pretty fast. You know, you wind the catapult up and they'll jump on and you fire them right into the battle.
In regards to your question on the tide, Andrew, I think it's vertex painted in, so I believe it is moving with the water, but I'm not entirely sure. I didn't really touch that.
Yeah, I remember Paul saying that it was vertex color controlled, so further out, you know, it's painted, so it's moving more extreme and it's closer and it gets it. Oh, it looks like it might have been toned way back as well. It's not working in the editor. It's hard to see. I work on the first game only by proxy, right? I made some assets for the Steam workshop, which is like open to the community, and they accepted some of my two helmets, a sword and a crossbow into the game that I made out of like 20 or so different bits and bobs I made. It was really cool that Chivalry 1 had that workshop integration. I think it's a really fun way to get involved in your favorite games, is making mods, making workshop stuff for it. I think it definitely helped me get into. This one when I have my like presentation day introductions, Steve the boss is like, "Oh, welcome back," and I'm like, "What? Welcome back?" Holy moly, moly! He remembers my stuff. He liked it, so I guess that's kind of cool.
So I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't work on the first game, but when I found out we were hiring, I instantly thought of Matt, and so kind of like talked my boss into like giving him a shot, and yeah, it worked out.
Thank you, Pat. That might be a good segue into our next slide sections, actually, Pat. Do you think?
Yeah, for sure.
Where's it gone?
Hey, Pat, that's a lot better than talking your boss into it and it not working out.
Yeah. Thank goodness
I
for
didn't-
that. All right.
I didn't hear that, but I'm guessing it was funny.
That's awesome. It's a good story.
So I just have a few kind of final closing tips. And yeah, just kind of things that I wish I knew when I was starting out. Just things I've kind of like picked up on, just very general. But first tip I would say is like, if you want to get into game art, focus on something. When I started learning 3D for 3 years, I tried to do everything. So I was doing animation, rigging, lighting, like compositing, and I wasn't really advancing too much in any single category. But then I found out that like companies were hiring for specific roles. That's not to say that you can't be a generalist. There are tons of companies, especially like independent ones, where they want people that can do a bit of everything. So definitely don't like give up your dream of being a 3D generalist. But if you look for jobs online, especially at bigger companies, then try to pick a focus. For me, it was environment art. And yeah, double dipping is totally viable. Environment art covers texturing, 3D, actually a lot of this stuff, lighting, some technical art, and some level art. So even VFX, like our environment artists are also our VFX artists. And I even do like a bit of concepting. So yeah, it kind of covers a lot, but when you're looking at applying for a job and building your portfolio, you probably want to pick a title. And under that title, you're going to have a ton of subcategories. Like a VFX artist needs to know some texturing, even 3D modeling. If you know you're going to spawn a decal, like a damaged decal on the ground, you want to sculpt that in ZBrush. So yeah, like you don't need to be so pigeonholed into one thing, but try to pick a job title that you want to have, and from there you can kind of specialize a bit.
There was something you mentioned, Pat, that I wanted to ask about, which I think might be interesting. The fact that you worked in ArcViz, you worked at Gameloft, you taught for a couple of years, then you worked at A44, but still you felt compelled to take 3 months off to build a portfolio.
Yeah, so I had been a lead for a while and I hadn't been making a lot of art, and I felt like I was really behind on my skills. Not to get an entry level position, but to because I already had a portfolio at that point, but to really get a job at like any company I want. That was my goal, or actually specifically a company that did stuff in the style of work that I wanted to do, which actually leads like directly into my next tip, which your portfolio is number one. It's your number one thing that's going to get you a job. A CV or a resume can be important, like you need one to apply. But even if you have 0 game dev experience but an amazing portfolio, you have a very good chance of getting your first job. Networking can help, like knowing people can definitely help, but I'm horrible at networking and I really don't like it. So I didn't have that going for me. But what I did have going was that I was willing to just like hunker down and work on my portfolio like a full-time job. Like I took 3 months off and I worked on it, not quite 40 hours a week, but like this scene here was the last portfolio piece I worked on because I wanted to kind of get better at baking and texturing. So this is like a low poly scene, but I tried to make it as realistic as possible in its treatment, but also like tell a bit of a visual story. And because I'm an environment artist, visual storytelling is a really important part of that job. And technically knowing how to make props and environment assets is also important. So I really kind of catered this portfolio piece to the job I wanted to get, or like a job that I wanted to get. But as you can see, there's like some organic elements in there with the tentacles. There's like a little bit of like lighting work being done, some texturing, and some modeling. But yeah, so like cater your portfolio to the type of job you want to get. If you want to be a UI artist, most of your work should be UI. If you want to be an environment artist, you can definitely still put characters on there or weapons and stuff, but focusing will definitely help you a bit to get the job, and it's really worth putting time into your portfolio. So I believe MDS has a portfolio class still in 3rd year. What I found is, what I found is the people that got jobs straight out of school had been working on their portfolio for all of 3rd year. The people who got jobs a year after were the ones who started working on their portfolio after they graduated. So you don't need to know exactly what you want to do, but kind of at your beginning of 3rd year, kind of start to think about where you might want to focus and try. I know like school can be like quite time intensive and stressful, but if you can find the time to work on your portfolio, that's a great time to start. Social media, and actually I guess this is just like internet presence in general. It's a great place to get feedback on your work and to put your work out there. So there are a few like kind of game art networks online. Like I'm a member of a small one just with a bunch of actually former MDS students and some former colleagues. But probably the biggest one is called the Dynasty Empire. It's run by this one guy, Jeremy. I think he's a senior artist at Ubisoft Massive. But he does streaming on Twitch where he kind of goes over techniques and stuff. There's a Discord that's got like hundreds, maybe even thousands of members, and a ton of channels. And like the majority of them are all like game industry professionals. So people from every single discipline. And they do monthly challenges, which I highly recommend doing. Even if you're not confident in your skills, just gets you like doing stuff. Portfolio reviews, which he does for free. You can just drop your work into a work in progress channel, and like you'll get feedback from like 10 different people, which you don't have to take all of it on board, but you can get some advice there, and the community in general is like very helpful. So yeah, like reach out to people, not necessarily by this platform, but however you can to get some feedback on your work. Twitter, I have a Twitter account, but I only use it for professional stuff. So like I'll work for maybe like, there's a time where I do spend about 2 hours a night just doing a small little project, like a quick model of something, or like a quick material in Unreal or Substance Designer. Post it on my Twitter, and yeah, it's great if you get some likes, but also it just kind of gets you putting stuff out there. And actually, I got my job at A44 from Twitter. I was posting some stuff, and the creative director just messaged me and said, "Hey, I like your stuff. Do you interested in working on Ashen?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, let's talk." and then I had a job the next week. So getting that online presence can be helpful. It's not a requirement, but I don't know, it was super motivational for me. And like even like me personally, like if anyone has any questions about anything about their career at any point, like shoot me an email directly, send me a message on Twitter, on ArtStation. I'm like more than happy to answer any questions. I occasionally get questions from like people I don't know out of the blue asking for some help with something, and I'm like very happy to help because the community has given me so much in the time I've been learning to become a game artist, that I think you'll find people like very happy to like help you out on your journey. Where can you find me?
I've got an ArtStation link at the end as well. But yeah, paddenal.com.
And then yeah, my name at Twitter. But yeah, if you just search my name, it's the first thing that comes up, I think.
Number one, Dunal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess my final slide
The final tip.
is just to be nice to people. The industry is very small globally. It's very small in New Zealand, although it's fortunately growing quite a lot, which is awesome. It's like probably nearly doubled in size since I started working in New Zealand. But your friends and your acquaintances may get jobs before you, and they might be working at a company you want to work for, and they can make or break your chances. So just like to give you an example, I was working for Torn Banner and they're looking for people, and I instantly thought of Matt. He's a super nice guy, and I know he'd be easy to work with. It also helped that he was a great artist and was really into Chivalry. But because of that, my boss gave him a chance, and I don't know if that would have happened if he just applied, because I think at the time we were looking for like people with like 10 years experience or something. But yeah, so or to give you another example, when I worked at A44, I think like 25% of their employees were media design school grads. And what had happened was like maybe one or two got hired, and then when they're looking for people, they think of people that they'd want to work with, that they then said, hey, what about this person, and at least got them in contact with the company, and then a lot of them get hired. But I've also seen it happen the other way, where somebody applies at a studio and like maybe they haven't been great to work with in the past, and that can like affect their chances. So yeah, just be nice to people. Like you don't have to like be like all sunshine and rainbows all the time, but just like don't be a jerk, basically. Like I'm pretty introverted, and I just like to keep to myself, but like that's like not being a jerk, I think, and yeah, so I think that's just kind of a final tip.
Yeah, this one's so important. I think it's like stuff to live by, right? Be nice to everybody because they're going to be your bosses, co-workers, friends, and big game dev family one day, right? So yeah, especially in school as well. Be cool to everybody. Cool. I think that takes us to question time. We've got a few more questions, and maybe I'll leave this up on the screen too for you guys while you're looking at it. So these are all of there's more on the Envrioment team now, but this was the team that worked on Gallencourt. So if you want to check out Paul and James's cool stuff too, specifically, and check out their art stations as well. Cool. Any Any questions?
So regarding the question on environment art, um, yeah, there's a few ways you can go about it. It kind of depends for the role you're applying for. Like prop artist is generally considered an environment artist. So if you really like modeling props, you can kind of focus on assets. I always like to see at least one environment, I guess, with like a few assets placed around. It doesn't need to be like a whole city or a whole room even. You can just focus on like a what I call like a beauty corner, like even just a corner of a room with like a table with some stuff on it, or maybe something a little bit more creative than that. But that kind of shows composition and lighting. So it kind of depends what aspect you want to get into. If you want to be a level artist, like someone who places assets in the level and works on composition and stuff like that, I'd say entire scenes are good. But also having a few single assets is great because it shows your technical skills.
Yeah, I think having like combined scenes, even with your props, right? Combining props into more than just a presentation of the props shows a level of like understanding on how like all the space works and fits in together. So I think there is definitely room that you would just produce assets, but it's like not a lot of room, right? It's like a big studio thing. I think as environment art, you're going to be doing a lot more things within environment art, right? So whether you're more on the micro detail prop making side or like the bigger environment, like set dressing and placing things together, and even big building making, I think it's important to have a little bit of a mix, regardless of which way you want to swing it. My environment portfolio is really bad. Mine's all props, but yeah, I'm working on it. As you can see, they're coming soon. It'll be updated eventually. That's awesome, Emerson. If I post us some updates soon, send us some links, pictures. Awesome.
Cheers. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us, Jordan.